Davos, Davos, Davos. Were you worried that the world was falling apart? You can stop worrying right now because the WEF is back with solutions for you, whether you like them or not. Good news, the coronavirus pandemic is in decline. Bad news, the Great Reset, where you will own nothing and be happy, is being brought about by economic policy decisions made by your government that will facilitate the advance of the most powerful interests on Earth. The WEF's Klaus Schwab recently addressed the World Government Summit, because he has barely any influence anyway. Some say that the WEF are working on schemes that could lead to social credit scoring, but they say they're not doing that. So who do you trust?
Russell Brand is taking on the World Economic Forum. We're going to take a look at the latest from Russell. We're going to see how globalists are just trying to pass him off as a conspiracy kook. But make sure to stick with me at the very end of this video when I'll reveal how recent academic studies are indeed corroborating Russell Brand's concerns. You're not gonna want to miss this. Greetings, you 889,000 miracles, you. I love it when he does that. It's me, Dr. Steve, your patron professor, helping to think better so you can feel better in these crazy and turbulent times. So if you haven't already done so, you know what to do. Make sure to smack that bell and subscribe. And also, what do you think of this shirt, huh? In honor of our Davos video here, Wie have We's, Klaus Schwab. Well, you can get your wonderful Klaus Schwab Wie have We shirt by clicking on that link below and visiting our amazing merch store with the best designs in the world. We got our brand new Ultra MAGA shirts. We got our great MAGA King shirt. We got some of the best Patriot gear out there. You can pick up something for yourself and for the patriots in your life. It spreads patriot hope and supports my channel here at the very same time. So make sure to click on that link below. Get your Patriot merch gear today. These designs are punchy, they're fun, but they're not going to stick around for long. So click on that link in the description below to support me and spread patriot hope. And I cannot thank you enough for it. All right, gang, so let's dive right in here. So, you know, I know many of you are fans of Russell Brand, as am I. His analysis of world events is very similar to this channel's analysis. We're both very, very populist. We're both very, very anti-globalist for sure, as we'll talk about in this video. Although, obviously, I'm coming more from the populist right, and Russell situates himself more on the populist left. But my, do we have some major common ground when it comes to the demons at Davos. You know, the presidents, the prime ministers, the CEOs and like, who all arrive in their private jets and are sequestered together in the remote mountain village of Davos, Switzerland every year for what's called the World Economic Forum gathering. It's the annual gathering of the world's 1,000 leading companies who, quote, seek to shape a better future. And Russell Brand has hardly been shy about what he thinks is ultimately going on at Davos. Here is a sample.
Your Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen.
Seeing Klaus Schwab with his shaved head on a big screen with that accent, I never think anything like, are you literally a supervillain from a parody of a Bond film?
It's my great honor to participate for the 8th time at this important meeting. Last November, in partnership with His Excellency Mohammed Al-Gargawi.
Who are these excellencies? He's talking, I think, to dignitaries and possibly royalty in Dubai, where this thing's taking place. So, nothing to worry about there then.
We brought together 60 top intellectual thinkers here in Dubai to define a longer-term narrative to make the world more resilient, more inclusive, and more sustainable.
A more inclusive, more resilient world where you might have nothing, but by God, will you be happy? Mandatory ID to go anywhere. Are you not somewhat concerned just by the existence of conferences of this nature? I don't want to be like a conspiracy theory fanboy, because I don't think we should just blindly assume that things are negative when there isn't evidence for it. But it appears to me that the accumulation, the congregation of these individuals, the places that they're from, the shared interest they have, the way that they're able to operate beyond the influence of national government, the way that they're able to seed their acolytes into government, that's something that Klaus Schwab talks about, and many of the ideas that you see spoken about in the World Economic Forum, at Davos, or affiliated publications, end up as government policy, sometimes in ways that are eerily perspicacious, in particular the 2016 documentation that Microsoft published around digital ID. Eerily perspicacious.
I love that word, perspicacity. Now, Russell has a great point here. Remember, what makes globalism globalist, as it were, is that it's a political and economic system that transcends borders and boundaries. It literally knows no frontiers. And so the concern is that the major political and economic actors within this globalist system, they're beyond any traditional form of accountability. They're not accountable to any particular government, since globalism transcends nation. They're not accountable to any particular population, since globalism transcends borders. So to what or to whom are these actors, those who gather together every year in Davos, to what or to whom are they ultimately accountable? Well, it seems increasingly clear that if we appeal to things like, the World Trade Organization or the International Monetary Fund or SWIFT, right, which is the International Financial Transaction Platform, I mean, just a cursory glance will demonstrate that these institutions are themselves directed and operated by the very people who belong to Davos. So it's no wonder that whatever is discussed at Davos eventually finds its way into public policy directives in national governments, which is another way of saying that the Davos crowd is not accountable to anyone.
As well as develop the necessary ethical and political frameworks around those new technologies to ensure that those technologies are human-centered and society-oriented.
Do you notice that Klaus Schwab is like a master of using innocuous and friendly-sounding language? We're just going to establish a framework. We just want a little framework that if you try to get outside the edges of it, you get a little teensy electric shock. And then another word they use is narrative, which is, of course, another word for story or theology or belief system. So they're creating a set of principles within which you can operate, a story to which you have to conform, and really presenting it as if it's a rather friendly, helpful, mutually agreed upon set of principles. But who's at these conferences? Who's making these decisions? Where do they get their funding? By what means and methods do they evaluate what the edges of the frame are and what the points of the narratives are going to be? These words carry real meaning and real import. And if you look at what's happened in the last 20 years, in particular with regard to the industrial or technological revolutions that Schwab is describing there, we've seen monumental social change, many of which have been brought about by unique events. I'm of course referring to the pandemic, a unique, unprecedented event, but it brought about unprecedented regulation, unprecedented new legislation, unprecedented new technologies, unprecedented medicinal advance and mandatory, in many cases, in some cases at least speculatively, mandatory advances. If you have a framework and a narrative, do you think that might influence how you respond if there's another pandemic, or how you might respond if there's a military conflict, and who's involved in that military conflict, and who might be able to sell weapons, and who might benefit from reconstruction? Having an established set of ideals that are achieved outside of any of our democracies, wherever you are in the world, these ideas are being centrally determined and then dispersed, even if it's not. Even if, like Klaus Schwab, is only one cat away from being a literal supervillain, even if it's just an intellectual think tank that disseminates its ideas through elected authority, but in so doing nullifies the will of ordinary people.
Now, what Russell's getting at here, bottom line, is who's supervising the supervisors? Who's proofreading their narratives? Is there any legitimate basis for dissent? Can we opt out of these narratives and frameworks that they're imposing upon the various governments around the world? I mean, it seems to me like those are very legitimate questions, aren't they? Where are the checks and balances in this world order? There doesn't seem to be any, does there? And if there were no checks and balances that are ultimately accountable to the will of the people, then we do in effect have what's nothing less than a real technocratic dictatorship, a global technocracy that rules everyone and is ultimately accountable to no one. Now, in response to these questions and Russell's attempts at answering them, Russell's been obviously tarred and feathered by our globalist elite media as nothing more than a conspiracy kook. But I got to say, I think something much deeper is going on here than just easily dismissed conspiracy theories, again, coming from those who believe in the Russian collusion hoax. Ironically, even the Academy recognized that something rather nefarious is going on in the depths of Davos, shall we say. What a lot of people don't know is there's actually been some very fascinating and rather illuminating academic studies on the WEF of late. And these studies expose a number of pretty alarming assumptions among the WEF's participants. Now, a couple of years back, there was an ethnographic study at the Davos conference by a pair of cultural anthropologists, Marcus Geisler and Oliver Schuh. The results of the study were published in the Journal of Consumer Research. And according to the authors of this study, what they uncovered was clear empirical evidence that the World Economic Forum wasn't about solving problems as much as it was about reframing them. Interesting, right? In other words, the World Economic Forum is an organization that consistently shifts the burden of the solution to global crises and problems away from governments and businesses and places the onus squarely on you, the consumer. This is absolutely essential to understand what's really happening with the world right now, and explains so much why more and more populations are realizing that the world is indeed dividing up between the people versus the untouchable managerial elite, right? The ruled versus the rulers. This is absolutely key. Again, according to anthropological research, the Davos managerial worldview pits the obligation to solve the problems of the world not on governments or corporations or big business, but rather the full brunt to change the world is going to be borne by you. And this is key. It's going to be borne by you as a consumer. And that's where Davos comes in. At any Davos gathering, over and over again, you hear speakers talk about creating business conditions that in effect control the choices of consumers in order to, quote, make this a better world. So take, for example, this person claiming that businesses are going to have to, in her words, recalibrate the notion of free speech.
We are finding ourselves in a place where we have increasing polarization everywhere, and everything feels binary when it doesn't need to be. So I think we're going to have to think about a recalibration of a whole range of human rights that are playing out online, you know, from freedom of speech to the freedom to, you know, to be free from online violence, or the right of data protection to the right to child dignity.
Everything feels polarized and binary when it doesn't need to be. So we, notice, we here at Davos, we're going to have to recalibrate a whole range of human rights. I mean, this is what the WEF is all about. They're not about finding solutions to problems in their own spheres of influence. They're not about blaming themselves or governments or corporations in the problems. No. They're all about shifting responsibility all over to you. You're the problem with all your polarizations. But again, in order for this to work, you have to reimagine yourself as a consumer. That's key. You're now fundamentally a consumer because that's the only way globalist corporations can control your behavior. So this is why George Soros pushes radically left-wing causes and candidates. Because being liberals, they're all about emancipating individuals from traditional institutions and values like faith, family, and freedom, which are all now recast as racist and bigoted and sexist and supremacist and all that nonsense, so that you're now free, quote unquote, to determine your own identity and autonomy. But in providing for us all of these options for our identity and autonomy, the question, of course, is can we opt out of that? Isn't that interesting? You see, they want a world of consumer cogs who live and breathe within globalist market conditions, which in turn enables them, the bullies in Davos, to create market conditions that would in effect socially engineer consumers into making, quote, the right choices when it comes to the environment and social inequities. And boom, you've got a socially engineered utopia. But of course, as a sovereign individual emancipated from the traditions of family, faith, and freedom, you now have to give up, ironically, your individuality. And that's because as far as Davos is concerned, your consumption, what you consume and how you consume it, is good and right only if it's been engineered and predetermined by them and their frameworks. It's pretty sinister stuff. So while Russell Brand may, put some of the pieces of the puzzle together incorrectly, while that may be true, I don't think his overall concern can be so easily dismissed as figments of a conspiratorial imagination. Certainly not from a legacy media that continues to peddle Russian collusion hoaxes and January 6th insurrection nonsense. No, Russell's over the target here. And his massive audience most certainly and demonstrably shows he's not alone. Now, before we go, you definitely want to check out my latest video I just uploaded on Liz Cheney utterly falling apart as her primary disaster approaches. You're not going to want to miss it, so make sure to click on that link, and I will see you over there. God bless.